Hello, and welcome to the Exponential Growth Podcast, powered by Analyst Investors. I'm your host, David Olivencia, co-founder of Analyst Investors, and a passionate advocate for leveraging innovation and technology to drive success. Let's get started. This is Exponential Growth. I also want to give gratitude to Salvi Media. They're the founding sponsor of the podcast. They're a premier executive content agency dedicated to crafting exceptional content and strategies that elevate companies' brands and their executives. They're creators of the Emmy Award-winning CEO series. I think many of you have seen that. We've also featured one of my portfolio companies, Analyst Investors and Hallow, on their CEO series. And they've had in-depth interviews with CEOs talking about their personal journeys and business experience. The CEO series can be found on Cheddar, Entrepreneur Magazine, Reach TV, and really want to thank Salvi Media for their support of the podcast. You can also follow them on social media, as well as they have a podcast studio in Chicago. Join them as well. So again, thank you, Salvi Media, for making this podcast possible. Today, we have a very special guest with us, somebody I've got to know over the last several years or so as we're investing in similar circles, and have become a fan of a lot of the things she's doing. She's the Chief Investment Officer at Tallypot Holdings, the Board of Directors of Crane Mary, Board Chair of 1200 VC, and she has a weekly newsletter called financeminute.com that I interact with regularly. I encourage you guys to follow it. She's a part of the Good Governance Institute, which we might touch on a little bit, and also part of the Millikan Institute. So please let's welcome to the podcast, Lupe Rodríguez. Lupe.
It is a pleasure to be here. Truly an honor, David, to be chatting with you today.
Oh, excellent. Well, so as part of the Exponential Growth Podcast, Lupe, we like to just start out and just tell all of our listeners out there about Lupe, your story. Please tell us your story.
Oh my gosh. It'll have to be the X version, right? Formerly Twitter. I think what's most important is it's not a rags to riches story, but it's definitely rags to rags to rags to more rags. And what that means is that I was born and raised in the Rocky Mountains in Colorado to Mexican parents, immigrants, and have been living the American dream, which I still firmly believe is alive and well. And I have built my career to try to provide access to other people like me, like you, like your audience, with everything that I've learned in my trajectory. I went from being an elementary school teacher to working in Washington, D.C. On the government side, then joined the private sector side when I realized how involved donors, investors, and Wall Street were in legislation and elections, et cetera. From there, I went to Omaha, Nebraska to work for Mr. Buffett himself. Then that's where I really learned how to invest my own money. So every step has been about learning the systems, what is finance, what is money management, what is everybody actually talking about, and why aren't I rich yet? And so if I'm working so hard, why am I not rich yet? So that has led me to wonderful circles of extremely ultra high net worth individuals, which I've always strived to become. And that difference between the 1% and the 99% is something that I'd like to help bridge. I don't think it's about jumping on the 1%. I think it's bringing the 99% over, and maybe we get somewhere to like the 40%.
Yeah. Well, what do you yeah, well, so what do you think, what are the big different, the 1% versus the 99%? What makes the 1% versus the 99%? Just a couple thoughts on from there.
It's very simple, but it is very hard. The simplicity is that it's attitude. The way that that group deals with money is more akin to how we deal with oxygen. It just exists, right? And I have choices. How big of a breath can I take? Um, and there are issues with it, right? Some people have respiratory issues. So attitude is one thing. When you always have oxygen, you never think about the fact that you can't have oxygen. And so you're you're also not having to tell your lungs to breathe. Like our body does it on its own. And
Yeah.
when we're out there trying to make money, well, it's a zero-sum game. Money isn't made, it's just exchanged. So attitude on the one hand, that there is abundance. Number two, I believe that you need to have a spirit of service, because why should anyone give me anything if I am not providing value? I need to provide you value in order to exchange anything. For example, your time. I was saying to you a moment earlier, you're really in the know on everything that there is. So in our field. So I value the time that I spend with you because I'm going to learn something. And my dad, he said, I don't have an inheritance to leave you, but here's the secret to life. Work for people that have money to pay you with. Spend time with people that have something to teach you. And
Yeah.
that's it. So I think that helps bridge. We've got to change our attitude. If we're upset about what other people have, then I'm not minding my own business and figuring out what I can do to take care of myself and how I can add value. And when I'm adding value, I'm also able to receive value. And I think that's what they mean when they say, do what you love and the money will come. It's just,
Yeah.
it doesn't fall out of the sky.
Yeah. And you're not working, and you're not necessarily working because you're doing exactly, what you love. No, that's insightful. You don't always try to bridge it back because a lot of people that I've met and come up with the ranks with didn't have much growing up. And it's always just insightful to hear that. And then Omaha, Berkshire Hathaway, I think you said this is where you learned how to invest, right? What what was it specifically that you learned, and what were some of the big takeaways working in Omaha, around in and around Berkshire?
So uh, I we first represented Berkshire in government contracts with one of the entities that they acquired. And there is a culture, and that culture, I would go back to providing value. Um, in Omaha, the environment in the Midwest in general is pretty chill.
Yeah.
So there's,
I'll admit, I've worked in New York, I've worked in all over the place, and yeah, it is more of a chill environment.
and I think going back to the attitude, you're not put in positions where people are fronting. They're not trying to show up in a rented Ferrari like in LA, or a really fancy $10,000 suit. The Birkin bag is irrelevant. And so when you move all of the, let's say, the commercialization out of it, you're focused on what you're actually doing. So if I have a cleaning business, I'm not really focused on how much money I'm making per se so that I can buy that Birkin bag. I am focused on, am I doing a good job? Am I using the right equipment? How can I make this easier? Are my employees happy? So I'm literally rolling my sleeves up and doing things. And that's really the attitude around Omaha. I participated with the Nebraska Angels, and that angel community was really my entree into what you do,
Yeah.
which is support the founders. When you see someone who has a tremendous idea, you want to support them. And what I saw happen around the table was, in the same way that I keep talking about exchanging value, maybe I have 1 shekel to give you, but that's not going to make you as a founder successful. It's going to help. But how
Yeah.
am I supposed to actually help you, which is something that you guys do so well at Angeles Ventures? You're not just investing, You're saying, hey, we can invest and we can also introduce you to this potential customer, or we can find you a deal or help you get a discount with this technology that's going to help you manage your accounting or your inventory. And so that's really the give and take and the helping. And that fundamental principle is what I've been able to carry into continuing to invest. Because when you're doing underwriting and you're seeing, well, should I invest in this company or in this fund? What I look for in the people, which a lot of people say, you invest in the people. What I look for is how resilient are they? How much do they actually care? How do they spend their time? Are they spending their time with their employees, with the people that are developing their technology, in libraries or classes, learning more about their subject matter? Like, where is their passion? If that's really where they're spending their time, then that's a big yes check mark. If they are investing in agriculture, but they're spending their free time on Instagram going to concerts, well,
Yeah.
it's like, okay, that's great. And now I see what you're spending the money that I'm investing in you at. And so that's different because either we're aligned in producing something for the world, or you're looking for me to invest in something so that you can spend the money.
Yeah. Definitely. Well, and then it kind of goes a little bit to your, like you touched on it a little bit earlier. It's like, and maybe the questions here too is like you you have a purpose in life, or you have things you love, or you have philanthropy, and then you have strategic investing, which you kind of do both of. How do you balance the both, and what would you tell our the listeners out there about how you can balance, call it philanthropy with strategic investing to more live your purpose, and how are you doing that today?
Well, you had been saying earlier how fast things are changing. Change is very difficult, even when you know you have to change. There's this barrier of fear of, well, if I give up the past, what will the future actually bring me? And unfortunately, as far as I know, no one has invented a crystal ball to figure that out. So we have
Yeah.
to, quote unquote, take a managed risk. And that managed risk is, I think, going from old systems like the traditional banking system into areas that include crypto and blockchain and other digital currencies. So that transformation, the philanthropy, the impact, the good investing really is not segmented. For me personally, it must be all of the above. One of the things that once a year our team spends doing is thinking about innovation in terms of, if this really takes off in the world because we invested in it and participated in its development, what does that mean for the world? What does that mean for society? Which, when you're investing and you're only thinking about the bottom line, you don't care about the circumstances, and that will come back to bite you. And that goes back to the Omaha way, uh, the Buffett way, in wanting to invest in companies for a lifetime. Because I know that when I invested in it, whatever I invested in 5 years isn't going to kill anyone.
Yeah.
It's um, it's going to help advance society and not make it worse, right? Or not be a short-term trend. Trends are dangerous. So, so that's one thing in being able to put all of those things together to say, is this really good? Do people really need it? If people really need it, is this good for them? And that takes us
Yeah.
to contemplate things like social media, right? Um, and how are we going to move forward? So we look at industry, financial industry, great, crypto, blockchain, et cetera. When we look at transportation, well, we have the environment to consider, we have logistics to consider, we have security to consider. And so seeing things from a common sense perspective instead of being fantastical. If you go to Singapore, you can now have your coffee delivered to you by a drone in the middle of a park. And so putting yourself in that situation, would I actually do that? I hate to admit it, but yes, I actually would.
Yeah. I see those Starbucks lines. You know, Starbucks coffee is good. I like Starbucks coffee. But I see the lines that says some of these Starbucks, and I'm like, it's going to take me 15 minutes to get a cup of coffee. It's like, oh my, that's. And I was just coming out of Whole Foods yesterday, I think, and I was talking with one of my teammates, and I said, there's, you know, they got drones, and I know they're working on. Actually, on this podcast, I interviewed somebody that who was working on that project, the drone project. I go, they're going to drop, Amazon and others, right? They're just going to, oh, I want a thing. They're going to drone them over, whatever, 5 miles, 3 miles, drop it off, just like they drop Uber Eats or whatever drops them off. So that's an amazing, that's amazing. But it's fun to see that you'd be right there ready to take that coffee in Singapore.
Oh, and so when we look at the past and the future, I can't even imagine what 5 years from now is going to look like. So when founders or great fund managers like you guys who know how to find the right founders have that ability to look into the future and say, how is this going to make it cheaper, more efficient, healthier, better? I think those are major considerations. And that goes back because if we're making good underwriting decisions, it will be good for impact, it will be good for society, and it will be good for our bank account.
Right. Yeah. No. And then they work together too. Sometimes what also is good for society is it can also be a great return. I have several investments in my portfolio that are doing that. And you touched on at least one trend. Call it like drone delivery. Um, uh, and what other you have a lot of exposure to venture firms, different asset classes. You touched on blockchain, crypto. What would be two other trends that, from your vantage point, you'd like our listeners to say, "Hey, these are trends you really need to just keep up on because if you do, you're going to be better. You're going to be higher probability for success in the future." What are those trends, Lupe?
I would say we have to touch on AI. And I recently was in a forum at the Aspen Institute where David Rubenstein was speaking to, he was on a panel with, I can't remember his name, great guy, young guy, who's the co-founder of Kraken, and
Oh yeah,
he's
yeah, 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 yeah,
of Tribe Capital.
yeah.
The discussion is one that we hear a lot. Okay, if AI goes full bore, how many jobs are we going to lose? What are people going to do? And David Rubenstein said he thought the answer to a lot of issues in the world was by ensuring young people learned math and reading, and being literate was super important. And this young guy says, actually, I completely disagree. He said,
Wow.
I, you may not need to know how to read if AI is reading for you or to you. You may not need to know how to do math if it's going to do it for you. And so that's a thought to to say maybe how we're thinking about things is is skewed. If the tasks can be done through robots or technology, then what is it that I'm bringing to the table? And I would say that's strategic thinking, that's care and concern, areas related to the humanities, related to the arts. Um, it's also not just about the programming of the software, it's about the ideas. So I think the commodity of the future are ideas. And we're seeing that play out right now with the, let's just call it a tiff between the United States and China. It's a
Hmm.
battle of ideas. It's a war of ideas. And so how can I work on how I think about the world. Um, and then if we want to just go brass tacks, when we look at technologies like AI, we think about it in terms of picks and shovels or plumbing. It's like, again, how is this going to be applied in a way that's going to be useful to
Yeah.
industry? And if it's just super cool, but we don't see how it's going to be applied and then how it could possibly scale, then it's just really cool.
Yeah.
So being very common sense about it, it might be very shiny and pizzazzy, but if my great grandmother couldn't understand it,
Yeah.
then I'm going to take a pass. Um, I think the other big opportunities, which we didn't mention, we talked about philanthropy, we talked about social responsibility and investing. We need to throw the government into that bucket. You know, as investors, we have resources. As the government, it's supposed to have, let's just call it guardrails and maps as to what can and can't be done, how we can do things well. And irrespective of politics, rules exist. And
Yep.
so taking a look at, let's say there's a great AI investment. Um, we'll give you a good example. 1,200 invested in a great founder called Earth AI. They use AI to identify uh, where minerals
Oh,
are
wow.
so that the mining companies don't just go randomly digging.
Right. They can be very surgical in where they go.
Yeah, so it's better for the environment. It's faster for the mining companies. So it's an efficiency, but it's also there's a goodness to it in how it's done. We're going to mine. So if we're going to
Yeah.
do it, how can we do it in the most responsible way? So that that is a really good example of how is that a pick and shovel plumbing kind of company that is based in AI. And then if you throw the government in there, well, you have all of these regulations on permits you have to file, fees that you may be fined for doing things incorrectly. You have the damage that you could do to Mother Earth, and the repercussions to communities. You know, maybe you have a mining community that there's a boom, but we saw during the gold rush the booms and busts.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so if there's a bust, that is not going to be a very good thing. And government plays a role in that. So you can't just leave them out until they come knocking on your door. Um, it's also now with how fast things are moving, in particular with the current administration and others. We're seeing it in Europe. We're seeing it. The EU is doubling down on environmental rules. Mexico is doubling down on foreign corrupt practices. We need to pay attention because we are not siloed as the private sector. We're either going to be joined at the hip, interacting with them, responsible for reporting to them, or hopefully trying to help them. Um, there's the greatest opportunity that I see for the very, very long term is in transportation.
Transportation. Okay.
90% of everything that moves on Earth comes by ship. And when we're looking at things like the Panama Canal or how you bring things from India to Canada, uh, you have the general trade routes. But then throw climate change in, and you're having new new ocean routes available. So in 5 years, you might be able to move something from India to Canada in a day. Whereas now it may take, and I'm making this up, so
Yeah.
Google it, Barbara. Um, maybe it takes 2 weeks, or you have to go all the way down south. So how climate change is affecting geography, how technology is affecting shipping and distribution, how infrastructure is powering um, these things.
Yeah.
There is just this huge evolutional opportunity within transportation. And since as long as we're on Earth, we're going to need to move things.
Yeah.
So where can I add value there? Who's doing things that are really beneficial? Who's using technology in a very thoughtful, common sense way? It's not uh, the flash in the pants, right?
Yeah, yeah. So there's a lot to unpack there. There's a couple things I was taking notes. It was a great question you said about this debate on, hey, I think you're not gonna need to learn how to read or do math. And I think you hit it because I'm of the opinion that you would, I don't care in an AI world, and it goes to your point around adding value. I believe you do need to read and you do need to do math because the things that you mentioned, you said, well, you're going to need to do strategic thinking. It's going to be very hard to do strategic thinking if you don't know how to read and you don't, I mean, you can ask AI about it, but how are you differentiated, right? Because you have to have patterns and you have to have your own judgment. They're going to have tools, but that was one. And then ideas was something that you talked about. I think innovative. I mean, AI is going to come up, but if you want the breakthrough, I think you're going to need the human part of it. And then, I guess I think all those ideas and innovations come with history. And I look, they've got all history. They got at their fingertips. But it kind of goes to, well, then how if you're just if you don't understand those things, then how are you going to and what value are you going to add? So I think you need to, and then the only way you do that is maybe you understand how to prompt AI better than the other way. But the only way you can prompt AI, if you're going to compete with somebody, you have to understand, you have to read and do math and have this analytical brain for that. So
Well,
that
that's,
was that.
yeah, how I interpreted what he said was more akin where you're going with this, which is right now or during our um, lifetime, it's been about science and math and engineering. And if you wanted to get a great job and make a lot of money, those are the areas you focused on. I think what you're touching on is this is where it's about philosophy and history and literature and how are you actually going to um, become a good thinker? If AI can do the math for you, it's exactly what
Yeah,
you're saying. How can you formulate the question so that it can give you a better answer? Garbage in, garbage out.
yeah.
And those are the things, if your daughter came home and said, "Hey, Dad, I'm getting a liberal arts degree and I'm going to focus on um, finger painting," you might be a little worried if she might get a job, right?
Yeah, probably I'd be a little worried, but it's like, how are you supplementing it with AI or learning about AI? But yeah. So that was a good one. It just had me thinking, but it was a good one. Then you talked about Kraken and AI, and the AI. One of the things that I heard, I didn't hear him say, but I heard that he did say was that there'll be this world where you and I and others will have multiple AI agents transacting for us, right? We'll give them guardrails on kind of uh, our philosophies or what are the best philosophies at the best and it might interact with you and then you give it that and then it goes out and it buys crypto for you, it sells crypto for you, it gets a loan, it negotiates a loan for you, and they're just doing all that stuff while we're out doing other things, and they're out there working for you, and they're and the scale was like you know hundreds of thousands or millions of these agents out there doing that. And then you were talking about the booms and the busts, and I was watching, I think it was on Amazon Prime. It was like this is the history of oil. And I knew, but there was a time where there was this huge boom across like Ohio and Pennsylvania, and they were just putting up these oil rigs all over the place. And you see these pictures, and it was like miles of just empty oil rigs. It looked like a dump of just oil rigs that were out there. And that had me thinking about that. But but the history of oil is just fascinating. And then your point around government, it's like it is, in this world of exponential change, how do you, how does government, how our government, how countries are going to compete is the right guardrails that they put up, around some of these technologies, and it's almost for anything, right? There's always a government implication somewhere, right? And what you're doing. And so it's always vital as you're thinking about, and the listeners are out there, as you're thinking about exponential things that are happening, just the government's involvement in either, and either they're helping accelerate it, giving us the right environment so we can win and grow and compete, or maybe not, and hurting us, right? So, as constituents, right? It's our responsibility to make sure that we're advising and voting in the right way that helps do that. So just a couple points. Any follow-ups on those,
Sure.
Lupe?
I always think about pronouns, and not in the traditional way these days. But when I'm saying them versus us, I know there's a problem. It's that old saying of, if I'm pointing my finger at you, I've got three fingers pointing back at me, if I have three fingers. So those three fingers pointing back at me goes back to your question of how do we think about things? And so I have no idea what is going to happen in terms of the evolution of technology, how regulators are going to react or enforce or even participate. I think we have to start thinking about ourselves as part of. The government isn't separate from us. We are citizens. And
Right?
when I was in school, right, I'm going to go into the stories about walking to school in snow uphill both ways with no shoes. But when I was in school, we had civics. And that is empowering to know, how can I participate? How do I give value? Maybe it's just picking up trash on the street. Maybe it's attending a city council meeting, staying informed. This stuff matters. You can't just sit there and point the finger at politicians if you voted for them, didn't vote, didn't participate. Like we're so lucky in this society to be able to participate. And hopefully all of this disjointedness over the last few years will help us realize that we can take active roles. So I always think about it as poniendo mi granito de arena, right? It's my little grain of sand. I'm not going to be able to build you a beach, but what can I take responsibility for? I can take responsibility for the decisions that I make, how I spend my time, um, who I support. Um, I think that is something that we need to start doing, is being accountable to each other and to ourselves. The golden rule, being a good neighbor, um, going to the store and not yelling at the cashier. It's everyone's doing the best they can, and I think we need to give a helping hand.
Yeah, and that's like one of mine is just like love one another. I think it's like the simple would solve a lot of the world's problems, right? Just love one another. Just
Yeah,
love
but
one.
but realize that loving one another is a very selfish thing. I'm loving everyone and I'm helping everyone. Doing those things are in my best interest.
Mhm.
And so it's not that I'm a selfish saint. I'm really looking out for my best interest. I want a good country. I want a good government. I want
Mhm.
good business. I want good accountability in our finance system. I want good jobs. I want good education. So if I want all of those things, where's my part in it?
Yeah, definitely. And then if so investing, right? So based on all the trends, what would you tell, all these trends that are out there, the AI you mentioned, government, like how should, and the listeners out there, they range. They range from maybe an early investor that's maybe just doing stocks. There may be somebody who's doing crypto, and then there's some venture folks that are listening out there. But how do with these trends that are going on, what would be one or two, three pieces of advice you tell them as they think about investing, things that they should do, avoid? What advice would you give them based on your experience?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't give them any advice.
Or perspective, maybe perspective. Is that better? Is that better?
I I would share the things that I'm looking at personally and not looking at. So looking at things that are part of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Food, water, shelter, transportation, those basic things. If I was talking to my parents who live on Social Security, I would say those are the kinds of things that they should focus on if they're investing, not spaceships, right? Not that they won't get there. Those investments are out there for some people. And some people, if you have that type of additional, what I think of as FU money, that's like, hey, I just
I
want to,
lose it.
here's
Yeah.
my moonshot. Here's, if I'm really going to make a difference, maybe I don't know, maybe cat liver will solve some disease. Okay, great. This guy thinks that that's going to happen. I'm going to take the risk and put my money in it. And I think about it as those are investments for fun and for free. But those of us everyday folks are they're those things. And they're things that if you look back in history, going back to Buffett, right? You think about evolutions like the light bulb, electricity, um, railroads. And so where is the future? Where are the future industries related to those? Um, I think about AI like electricity. A lot of people were very afraid of electricity. Um, my grandmother thought that the telephone was evil because voices would come out of the telephone, right? And so um, it's not exactly the same, but going back to where we started, change is really hard and it's inevitable. So where are things changing that I feel comfortable in um, enough that I'd be okay to put my money in, um, usually in things that I'm also going to use myself.
Right.
So electricity is a good one because that takes us to energy, nuclear energy, solar power, wind power, and it's necessary, right? It combines all of those things, philanthropy, good governance, impact, the environment, regulation. So energy is a big one. Um, Chip manufacturing. We need them, we need chips for everything, right?
And it's not slowing down anytime soon, right?
No,
It's,
so
it's actually going the other way. It's like it's a world where you're competing on more and more chips, and I don't think it ever stops, right?
right. If you had a board game and you pretended that you were building these manufacturing facilities everywhere, how many could you build before you didn't need any more? Again, thinking about investing in very common sense terms. When you get lost in the
Mm,
nomenclature is when I think one can get into trouble. Um, those are probably the two things I would uh, think are applicable both in privates and publics.
got it. So maybe in just the last theme or topic would be you put this weekly newsletter out, of financeminute.com, and you're also part of the Good Governance Institute. Um, Tell our readers kind of why you do the financeminute.com, what the impact that it's having, what you're and the impact you want it to have. For those who are listening, I strongly encourage you to read it. It's like it's a minute. You can takes you literally a couple minutes to read, and they're very insightful. But share perspective on both Finance Minute and Good Governance Institute.
So going back to my life story, I hope that uh, my epitaph will say that I shared everything that I knew and that I died empty. I left it all on the field. I want to share everything I've learned through my own struggles, through, I'm a big reader of biographies, um, of what I learned from my colleagues like yourself. And whatever it is that I can do to make someone's life a little bit easier is my primary philosophy in life. In general, I would love it if everyone were wealthy. And so my grain of sand in contribution is, how can I teach finance in a way that makes sense and is applicable to me and isn't scary, right? I don't have to go take an accounting class or statistics. Like, how can I start thinking about what money is, what wealth is, what assets are, what accumulation means, what responsibility do I have as a human being in my involvement? And we can't end without talking about, the elephant in every single room in the world, which are women. And so I've been thinking a lot about women um, who traditionally just haven't leaned into finance, and thinking about all my, and I say this with love, my finance bros, that uh, when they're giving their reports to some of their private client, they might as well be speaking some alien foreign language because they're throwing out all this nomenclature. And when you leave the human out of it, then that's where the services start to break down. So I wanted to make sure that there was a place to start having a conversation that included, where are your daughters in all of this? Where are your wives? When you are, and this is applicable to all of our families. I don't have children, but if I did, holy moly, once one of them was about to get married, I'm sure I'd have a lot of thoughts about who they were marrying and how they would be incorporated into our family. Well, the more wealth you have, the more technicalities there are. And so if you're someone who's striving to be wealthy or already are, why not start thinking about those things? And even if you just have, let's say the only thing I had to leave in terms of an inheritance is a car, right? It has emotional implications as to which of my three kids do I leave the car to? Do I make them
Yeah.
and split the proceeds? Maybe it's a classic car. Like, thinking about those things, taking away the idea of succession and death in that kind of finite darkness, where these can be topics to bring families together. This
Yeah.
where it's like, hey, we grew up poor, so we have this mentality of lack, and so we're very afraid. Do I want to pass that on to my kids, or do I want them to learn about abundance and about the joy in having a vocation, and how that allows me to go skiing with them once a year? It's like those shifts, those paradigm shifts, I think are really important. So that's what started with the Finance Minute, and the Good Governance Institute is on Substack. Um, when they say it's lonely at the top, it's very lonely at the top. And one of the things that has really been concerning me is that when you have the most power and the most resources, you can have the most influence. And do you want people with the most power and the most resources to be mentally ill, depressed, lonely, angry? No, I want them to use their powers for good and to be happy and to interact and to not have picketers outside of their house because they worked really hard and they happen to drive a Rolls Royce, right? It's like um, the Good Governance Institute is just a bigger picture of what role can we as allocators, family members, those of us that are representing them, what role can we take to make a better world? And that's why it's called good governance, because behind every company, every founder, every family office, every investment, if you have good governance, then you're able to do better. You know what the rules are, you know what to expect, and so you can focus on what's in your lane. And you don't have the ambiguity of what's going to happen when, what's going to happen if. It's like, no, if my father dies, which inevitably he will, what do I do? Who do I call? Where's all the stuff? Where are the papers?
Mhm.
Who does he talk to? And that's also more about the human connection, right? And talking to each other. Do your kids know who your best friends are? Do they know where you spend your time? And uh, the wealthier people are, the more implications those things have, right?
Yeah. No, Lupe, very, very insightful across many dimensions that we touched on. How would our listeners stay connected with you on social media and other platforms and keep up with what you're writing on a Finance Minute?
Sure. So LinkedIn is the best place, and it's Lupe Rodriguez. Um, the newsletter is called A Finance Minute. You can find it at afinanceminute.com. And my website is luperodriguez.com.
Excellent, everyone. Well, Lupe, I know you got a ton of things going on, very, very busy. Thank you for making it a priority and jumping on the podcast. For those listening, stay connected with Lupe. Check out the financeminute.com. Follow her on LinkedIn. A lot more great things, I'm sure, are to come. So thanks again, Lupe. Have a great one.
I really appreciate it, David. Thanks for your service. This is a great community service, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.